know, one a year.
Okay, so let's take a look at the bill. Representative Pearl is in a different chair.
Yep.
Now, so
Yeah, so for the record, Henry Pearl. This is something obviously that I've talked about with you guys before. You're probably a little bit aware of where the premise comes from, but I'll kind of break it into there's two buckets, I guess. It's, it's ag education, but in my mind, there's kind of the agriculture piece and then the nutrition piece, which are kind of two separate things as far as what I was initially looking for. And the basis for it is just that in my mind, agriculture and nutrition are both things that are important to in my mind, the theory of education is supposed to be setting up kids for the future, right? Giving them a knowledge of things, life skills, things they're going to need, things that are going to help them in life. And my feeling is that both agriculture and nutrition in a little bit different ways are two things that are very important and maybe more important these days than they have been in the past. Like my argument has always been like, what's more important or equally as important, knowing how to spell a word correctly or knowing where your food comes from. Like I think both things are probably important, but I would argue that, the nutritional aspect and agriculture are just as important as knowing English and, those sorts of things. So, but anyways, kind of to break it down into the two things. So agriculture comes from more of a point of my feeling that kids, really everybody, are more disconnected from agriculture than they were in the past. So there used to be more involvement just because of the way the landscape was rural. I mean, there's statistics on this, but basically that, it seemed like in the past, everybody knew somebody that had a farm or had a neighbor that had a farm or grew up on a farm. And now there's much less of the population that's involved in any way in agriculture or food production. And so I think it would be fair to both agriculture and to kids to at least have some sort of access or touch to that, because I think without having any knowledge or knowing anything about agriculture, the chance of somebody getting involved in it and realizing they're interested in it and pursuing it and valuing it are probably much less likely. So if kids aren't getting it from the neighborhood farms because there just isn't many of them anymore, or from their relatives because they don't have relatives that farm, or just that continuing disconnect between the food cycle and people. And so this is just a place basically where kids are going to at least touch on it and pique that interest. And there may be, maybe everybody will get a little taste of it and say, I don't want anything to do with it still, or I don't care, and that's fine. But just having that opportunity, like you'd never know you wanted to be a mathematician if you never had to try math, so that's the access point, I guess, is the agriculture bucket. And then the nutrition one is probably the much bigger one, which is, I think there's so many pieces of agriculture and nutrition that really have a huge effect on whether it's climate change or healthcare, whether we're talking about the food we're putting in our bodies and obesity and all those things that kind of wrap around food and agriculture that we don't always think about. And then there's the piece of the impact on the world we live in and our neighbors and our community. And so being able to have some at least basic knowledge of those facts just as a life skill, I think is really important. Just to dip your toes in, if you will, to understand, there are reasons that, these things happen and need to happen for agriculture. And these are maybe the effects, and whether it has to do with economics or, the environment or whatever, this for me is an access point for kids, and for people just to start asking the questions to pique the interest and maybe bring that home and say to their parents, you know, hey, I learned about eggs today, and where do you buy your egg? Or where do we get our eggs? And if they're from I'm not really setting this up in a way that there's a right or wrong answer. I'm not saying that we should be teaching local food or that we should be teaching, you know, anything in particular. It's just an opening the door to asking the questions, which I think we all understand is important with everything. And so that's the big picture. And I think the one piece in here, I left this extremely broad. And when I was working with Beth, like, because I don't have any sort of answers or total ideas of how this should be set up or how to do it. And I know the education process there's a lot of complexity to education. Like, it's a stressed field anyway, and you start adding something, and does that mean it's taking away time for something else? I guess this is kind of in the same sense, opening the door to let everybody here hopefully kind of think about, is this something we want to do and how would we do it? And so that ties into the middle part of the bill, which is the curriculum. And, you know, the way the bill is written right now, it basically says that the Agency of Ag it is going to come up with that curriculum. I don't know. That was kind of a placeholder. I think maybe that's something that we want to have a conversation about, like how much control or how much of a guideline do we want to set up? You know, what do we think is important or what's going to be best for the kids? Maybe that's something that we structure a little differently or at least take testimony on and figure out. And so, yeah, it's pretty simple right now. Just trying to get the conversation started, and hopefully we can come up with something that feels like it would be helpful for ag and our kids. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Neat.
Any questions?
Questions? Yeah. Representative Levitt.
More just a comment. I think this is great. And I think to make it easier for teachers, they could probably find a way to weave it in through everything rather than like, this is your new unit. So it doesn't seem as
Absolutely.
onerous.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're not creating a whole new unit. We're just like what you said, talk about the eggs, a little here, a little there. Could even weave it in universal school meals. It could be part of the educational component to lunch or breakfast.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many, and I think there's so many schools that are doing this already. Like I feel like it should be mandatory that it kind of gets everybody thinking about it and doing that, weaving it in. And I mean, there's ties to everything, whether it's reading and writing or math. There's agriculture. I mean, you can write about the farm down the road and you can learn how to count eggs, whatever. But yeah, absolutely. So
maybe it would inspire schools to have a community garden, and then they could really have a lab.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to do is add that. And that's kind of why I was bringing it up. I don't want to add a burden to schools at all. Cause I know it's so hard, especially post-COVID with all the other aspects that teachers are having to deal with that's taking away from kind of the core education things. But I think it can be weaved in. I just think it's really important and will set kids up for a better future and hopefully a better community and better agriculture and all those things. I like my favorite quote that I don't actually know is the one about what's honored in a country is cultivated there. And I think it's just important to get this conversation started so that people are thinking about agriculture and then maybe just, at the grocery store thinking about what they're buying. And I think that's just a positive thing all around. And this is just an attempt to make sure that conversation is happening, I guess.
Representative O'Brien.
So I like what you were saying, Henry, about, it seems generational now, maybe a couple generations that Vermonters are really pretty much removed from the farms. I just looked up in 1947, year of your birth.
I was middle-aged by the
There were 11,206 dairy farms in Vermont.
Yeah.
500. Growing up on a dairy farm was really common. an education from just growing up. We're now,
Yeah.
you know,
And
seen a cow.
right. And that's something that like I had to kind of realize, me personally growing up on a farm and in a community where there was still a lot of agriculture happening. Like I always thought everybody knew, and then you step out into the world and people are like, does chocolate milk come from brown cows? And you're like, but that's a real question. Like there's real, like people don't know. And it's like, okay, there is a disconnect here. And that's probably part of the problem because people don't understand or don't have there's no utility in that food, because it's just a thing that they buy, and without knowing the consequences and the benefits and all those things around it, there's really no reason to pay attention. And I don't think that's probably good for anybody. But, yeah.
Henry, is this really a K through 12 sort of curriculum thing? Or is there
I was thinking about that this morning on the drive in, and I was like, where, and that's something where I'd be interested, I think be an interesting thing to take testimony on, just like, human development and all those things. Like, where is the best place? Where are you going to throw something at somebody where it's not doing any good and we're not going to waste? Or is it more at a high school level where that interest can really be piqued and they're going to grasp it? Or is it at a young level where kids are really excited about seeing a cow, so where is that? And is there research or knowledge on that? And I think that could kind of maybe help us base around where we put it in, or, obviously I'd love it to be weaved in everywhere all the time, but I get the most bang for our buck, right?
Right?
Yeah, and it feels to me like, just in the context of the list of all the other things that course of study means learning is it's like all those things are things that you're teaching throughout the K through 12 experience, right? And so if we could sort of have it be featured in, science classes is sort of where it is here, but like, wherever it makes sense, but kids in elementary school are already doing things like hatching butterflies. And,
Right, right.
It's just like naming that we should in the course of that study be featuring talk about pollination systems and how important
Sure.
pollination is for food
Yeah.
systems. So, and then at the high school level, it's more sort of maybe that systems study and that sort of like, and so it does feel like there's sort of appropriate levels of study throughout the K through 12 experience.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Henry, just a couple of thoughts. They're all positive, but following up on Representative Rice, in the 1960s, early 70s, I ran a conservation school in southern Vermont. And that program was simple. We brought 7 to 11-year-olds into the woods for 5 days, including sleeping over, and taught. It was basically propaganda of environmental awareness, water quality, pond life, edible plants, but it was educational. My observation was the younger, 7 to 11, were riveted by everything they were fascinated with in the sort of whole ecological web. You got into the 12 to 14-year-olds, which they were staggered.
Yep.
The ability to concentrate was different. So I would think in this terms of, if you wanted to guess best bang for the buck with hands-on stuff, elementary level's a good time.
Yeah.
And then the other point I wanted to make, and this is just observation from input this committee has been fortunate to experience on the Hunger-Free Vermont or farm to school aspect. Some of the most compelling testimony we received were from nutritionists who ran food programs in schools. Some of them were over the moon engaged, and some were average, like any educator. They're great ones, but I would, think in this bill, or as you counseling the bill, there's a great resource in many schools, and they are the nutritionists, the true believers that quality, local, or nutritious or fresh are values that are important, and they can be participants in the educational curriculum. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think like, you know, we had the conversation a lot during the universal school meals discussion about how it seems like the schools that are doing this really, really well, it's happening because there's somebody there who really cares about it. And so it would be interesting to, in the course of taking testimony on this bill, you know, if we do it, to have people in from the, you know, to identify the programs where this is already happening. I know, like at BBA, for instance, there's a whole food studies program. It's, you know, it's electives, but it's, you know, it's like on farm, you know, really deep, great program. And so it would be cool to hear from the people who are, you know, where these programs exist largely because of like some great teacher or whatever, and try to glean sort of, okay, how can we pull those things out and make it sort of like we were talking about with universal school meals, less personnel based and more sort of like, how do we develop this culture of this being an important thing in every school?
Yeah.
And I think if there's a focus on nutrition and agriculture, I think there's also sort of a physical education element to it too, because so many kids are sedentary today. But farm life, at least traditionally, not driving a tractor around.
Right, for sure.
Is incredibly physical. When you look at old photos, nobody is obese on farm families. And what you eat too, I mean, it's like compared to now, you know, even if you ate starches and apple pies because you were exercising so much, right? There was a sort of natural trade-off as opposed to playing video games.
Right. Yeah.
Arizona Iced Tea.
Let's get Rodney's question in, and then I think we.
I don't really have a question.
Very
It's
specific.
more of a comment.
Family.
In the past years, we've heard testimony from schools that have done a garden, you know, and it's usually the younger kids, you know, older age. One of the challenges is, of course, growing season, not school season. But they had where kids would rotate, you know, to come in and do weeding and they all got together to do for the harvest and whatever. And Williamstown, when we renovated our high school the last time, we put a greenhouse on. That kind of that purpose. And it worked well, and some till the older kids figured out it was a good way to start their marijuana plant.
Scratch that from the record.
Yeah, there's a provision that, you know, changed a little bit. At one point, the kitchen staff was actually growing, you know, like lettuce and vegetables and stuff that they use for lunch. So, you know, it's a good thing to do. Every school out there.
Great. Well, why don't we stop there? Or you can, we're gonna have